I think the most we've ever had is almost 30.
Gotcha.
Usually kind of usually the standard for the weeks, but
Gotcha.
it's funny you started speaking up because you being the fresh face, we usually like to have the new people just give us a quick 60-second blurb about yourself and then tell us what you're hoping to achieve or striving to achieve through the mastermind.
Sure. So I only been in the real estate space like last 2 years. So after college, actually went to China, just learned Chinese. A fun fact about me. And coming back here, started public accounting, hated it, did that for a year, got my CPA and left. And at that point, I was trying to figure out what I can do to kind of like break away and do something outside the 9 to 5. So that's how I got interested in real estate. Bigger pockets, one thing led to another. So you see Josh's post on LinkedIn, reached out to him, and yeah, that's why I'm here now. And what I'm looking to get out of it is pretty much just learn as much as I can, build network relationships, just pretty much be like a well-versed professional in this space and start closing some deals. So I'm looking forward to working with everybody and feeding off each other's knowledge. And
Love it.
Jinx, you have Minnesota, Roar.
Got you. Next time we meet.
Yeah, freaking. Hopefully that's soon. Moving down where you're at.
Sure.
Based out of? I don't know if you mentioned that.
Sean, where are you based out of? Dan was asking.
oh, sorry, Philadelphia.
Really?
City of-
Are you an Eagles fan?
Yeah, don't even mention the Sixers. So if any of you guys watched that game last night, that was rough.
Funny. Funny.
Where are you guys all based out of? Or all over the country?
Freaking everywhere.
Yeah.
Samir, aren't you in New York? No, you're not. You're in. For some reason, I always feel like you're in New York, but you're in Nashville, right?
For now, for another day.
Literally another day.
Yeah.
Where are you going after that?
Going to Raleigh.
Oh,
Raleigh Durham.
Yeah. Focusing on finding some deals on the East Coast, so wanted to put my feet out there.
Tamer was supposed to be in Alaska today. Tell him that story, Tamer.
Oh man, I'm supposed to be on a plane right now, by the way, but the American Airlines people are fucking. Sorry, we're recording. They don't know what they're doing. So now I'm flying tomorrow, and yeah, it's been a logistical nightmare. But here we are. It was also that I could make it to the mastermind.
was it a maintenance problem? I could have fixed it.
Yes, it was the. So explain this to me. Yeah, I forget you have background in this. It was the pilot's seat. That's what they told us. The pilot's seat is the reason they canceled the flight.
What'd they say about it?
That's it. They said we're experiencing maintenance issues with the pilot's seat and we have to delay the flight, and then it turned into a 12-hour delay.
Wow. Maybe I've never seen a pilot seat have any direct correlation with like flight controls or safety.
That's
other
what
than
I thought
literally
too.
just the seat belt.
Just get him a foldable chair.
Dude, I
And-
told them give me a 2x4 and some cedar blocks or cinder blocks, and I'll go fix the man's chair for him.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they were waiting on a part to arrive. Like maybe they just ordered a new seat or something.
Yeah, one of the flight attendants made a
track.
joke that, oh, the part is probably in Tulsa or something like that. So I'm guessing it was a part issue.
I've never seen a flight delay that long for
Yeah.
a pilot's chair. I mean, you do need the pilot's chair though. There's certain safety regulations that are required in order for you to actually be able to take off. So maybe they were just truly missing a specific piece, or the piece had broken and you couldn't safely sit in the chair, right? Like the seatbelt busted or something. I don't know.
Could be. Who knows? But here we are.
Here we are. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about real estate. So
Yes.
we're gonna go ahead and let Mr. Roar and Reggie take it away here, and I'll blurb it in between as we cover. What are we covering, guys?
Let's jump into it. What's up, guys? All right.
Beginner series. Whoop, whoop.
Beginner series. We're calling beginner series, intro series. I don't like beginner series. We'll call it the intro series. How about that? Our intent here is at the bottom of the slide here. Our intent is to package the next 7 or 8 weeks or so into a nice kind of good onboarding flow into the school system that we're going to be onboarding into here. So I don't know if you guys have used Kajabi or School before or any of those kind of online course systems. We're going to be transitioning to School is the plan, and School has its own little online community of sorts. So it's going to be better engagement than Slack alone. Slack has some limitations. We're still going to leverage Slack, don't get me wrong. But having School, and then we're going to kind of, our goal is to brand, not brand, but package some of these together. So it's easy for you guys to jump back. If you had a question, let's say you join, a new person joins in a couple months, they can jump back and just kind of go through this flow, big picture there. As far as the flow itself, we covered creative financing last week. This week, we're going to talk about personal business basics, financing, structure setup, support, things like that. And then we're going to go specifically over the SREO and the PFS. And so kind of how to fill those out. We're going to give you some documents that you guys can, if you haven't filled out yours ever, you can kind of just start filling it out now. And as you go along with your real estate investing journey, you kind of just continue to keep it updated. Better to start early. Otherwise it's a headache. It is. And we'll get into that. Next week, we're planning on going real estate company structure overview. We're talking to our attorney right now to see if our attorney can jump on next week and be kind of the prime 30-minute meat of the lesson next week and ping him with attorney lessons or questions. Reggie, do we hear back from him yet?
I have not. No.
Not yet. Okay, cool. So we're hoping to get our attorney involved. If not, we'll still kind of talk to business company structure overview stuff. After that, we're planning on doing a high-level deal overview. So that's going to be more of a start to finish surface level, again, introduction series, surface level from like soup to nuts for a deal. So that's kind of, Josh was saying he's never really, he's dived into specific topics, but it'll be a one lesson on kind of everything. Not very deep, but kind of big picture, 30,000 foot view of a deal overview. After that will be insurance. Insurance is one of those kind of murky topics. We're going to try to get our insurance broker on here as well, because he can answer a lot of specific insurance questions and talk to you about the state of insurance, specifically along the Gulf Coast, is just absolutely terrible. Then we'll get into branding and marketing, jump over to capital raising. And then after that, we're planning on having some sort of a stand-up role play. We're not sure what it's going to look like quite yet, but some sort of more of an interactive Q&A to fill in the gaps for anything we've kind of missed in this whole introductory series. And then we'll kind of package it up from there, and that'll be that. We'll move on to the next kind of flow or series we'll focus on. Any questions on the series flow, guys? Cool.
I don't have any questions, but I did want to mention, I was watching the SEC video that we had with Kyle, and I emailed Kyle today, and they said that from Robinson Frainsman, that he's no longer with the firm. So I didn't know if there's a updated person or anything of that sort, or if you're still using them or not, but just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, we use a different attorney anyway, but he just had a lot of knowledge about it and wanted to come out and talk to us. But our actual SEC attorney is who we're trying to get to come and speak to you guys about
Okay.
all that good stuff.
No, but Paul, thanks for that, man, for sure.
I was like, that's probably why we hadn't heard from him.
Yeah.
No, we talked to our attorney. It's relatively frequently. I say we're talking to him.
Okay,
He's a real
perfect.
person, I swear.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for the heads up. So today, personal business basics, guys. So we're not trying to jump into the weeds too much. Again, this is more the introductory series. And why is this important? It's because your personal business structure, entity, financial kind of well-being is all built, or your bigger picture real estate empire is going to be built upon your personal business. So this is truly the foundation as we kind of dive into the weeds, starting with a blank page to kind of look here. All right, personal finance. I know there's some. Paul, didn't you say you're a financial advisor? What do you do again?
Yes, at
Okay.
Maryland.
Sweet. So we'll leverage you for sure. I know a lot of financial advisors are relatively weak when it comes to real estate knowledge, right? A lot of them are very smart when it comes to your traditional mutual funds, stocks, bonds kind of mentality. But when you start talking real estate investment strategies, they kind of get uncomfortable. They're like, why don't you invest that money into some college savings fund rather than real estate? Is it, I'll leverage you now when we got you. Is there a reason that is the case, or I know you're nodding your head with me, so. what's
No,
your-
that's absolutely right. So for 10 years, I was a private client banker. So I dealt a lot with the personal finance stuff. And then when I moved into the financial advisor role the last 3 years or so, it's basically you're talking funds, mutual funds, portfolio stock portfolios, managed money, things of that sorts. And they'll talk about alternative investments like real estate, but a lot of times it's like, hey, why don't you just get a line of credit against your brokerage account so you can go buy your real estate? But we're really not offering, too much detail on that.
Yeah.
They do have, depending on the size of the firm and the clientele, they'll talk to you about Blackstone commercial REITs and stuff of that sorts, but that's as pretty much in depth you're gonna get.
Yeah, so that rather than actually getting your hands involved in real estate itself, you're effectively buying a stock in a real estate company.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and that's definitely something that's been my experience. There obviously are financial advisors who are super savvy in real estate, Paul being one of them. But there are vast majority of them out there are just really, really vanilla and stick to that. So personal finance, first and foremost is the very basic of the basic is understanding debt to income. And the reason this is important is because I know this is more of a commercial mastermind undertaking here, but your personal debt to income statement is going to affect you in more ways than one. Josh can speak to it right now because he's going through it, trying to figure out his personal debt to income. And one of the biggest issues when you're in real estate and you're truly starting to build this empire is that your taxable debt to income kind of disappears. So Josh, do you want to kind of talk through kind of what you've experienced recently with your personal take and how real estate's impacted that versus, you trying to buy properties?
You talking about like me buying a personal property or me buying?
Yeah, exactly. So it's personal finance side, how real estate has kind of affected that, and if you would have done anything differently going forward.
Yeah. I guess maybe I would have set up some kind of S corp and actually had some kind of like payment structure to myself so that I could see me receiving legitimate income, pay stubs or some kind of legitimate income. Because the way that we've structured it now, or the way that we have it now, I currently show that I make my tax return last year showed that I made like negative $220,000. And so anyone that took a look at that was like, nope, no bueno. But then you had the little bit more like slightly sophisticated, broker lenders that were like, well, we can take all the depreciation from your real estate and we can add it back into actual income that you make. But I was told, because these are syndications, the way that like the K1 or something was structured, that a lot of the properties, they basically couldn't do that with. They were like, we can't do it with this, we can't do it with that. And if I'm being completely and totally honest with you, it didn't make a lot of sense of why there were certain K1s that they couldn't actually add back towards my income. But all that to say, when I added up, when I looked at all the K1s that we had and I looked at the depreciation, it showed that I made like, I don't know, a couple $100,000 or something like that when it was all said and done. But they were like, according to us, because of this depreciation here and because of this and because of all this that's pieced together, we're showing that you make practically negative income. And then there's not really much that we can add back. And it was defeating, to say the least. So I didn't really have much of a creative solution at that point other than to redo my tax return and take all the depreciation that I had done, that I had already taken from previous years. You can basically edit your old tax return and pay taxes on it so that you can get approved for a personal residence. And I didn't really want to do that either. I was like, I don't want to go back and pay taxes on stuff I already haven't paid taxes for, because then my CPA told me that I actually lose some of the depreciation if I like throw it off. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that either. That sounds terrible. So then I was honestly stuck with either just keep waiting, wait another year or so, wait to restructure the way that I actually craft my 2022 tax return, which I still haven't finished. it's another conversation. But once you finish that, they were saying, once I received that, if it was high enough, then they could use that. But I honestly didn't want to wait. So I just ended up putting 20% down. But all I have to say, debt to income is definitely important when you're looking to get any kind of primary residence. When you have your real estate, your like depreciation that you have incoming to offset. So the best advice that I could give would literally just be to have a conversation. If you know this is something you're going to want to do in the next, call it even 3 to 5 years, like buy a primary residence or buy some kind of personal property, I would say just to have a conversation with your CPA and confirm how your taxes need to flow in order for you to be able to do that. And then that'll easily flow into what you need to structure K1s and all that, this, that, and the other. And often the CPA can be the one that does your returns as well as your K1s if you wanted them to.
Yeah, so Josh highlighted a lot of the points that I was trying to get across, understanding the complications that jumping into real estate full-time can cause when it comes to your debt to income ratio. So debt to income for those from a very vanilla level is just how much debt you have on your books, personal books, versus how much income you're showing personally as well. So there's a couple ways to offset this. One is through structures. We were talking about this earlier. If you purchase personal properties under your personal name, then that's obviously going to show in your personal books. If you're buying it as an entity, then you don't need to show those on your personal books, so you can offset things that way as well. So just realize there's ways to offset this. But the big takeaway here for me is don't quit your job until you really are in a position that you're super comfortable and almost have to. My typical recommendation when people are saying, hey, I want to jump into real estate full time, I really want to do it. That's great. And I really want people to go full force in, but it does shift a lot of things personally for you from a debt to income standpoint. So yeah, no big secrets here. It's just something to realize as you jump out. Josh is a perfect case example here of, as he's recently jumped full-time into real estate. Had he tried to buy a house when he had a W-2 before, lenders have no issues seeing a W-2. Now me, when I bought my house recently, after I've been real estate full-time for a couple of years already, if you are able to show consistent 2 to 3 to 4 years of income, most lenders aren't going to care. And honestly, it's really, really lender specific. Some lenders, like Josh alluded to, are very happy to look at your debt to income and kind of have a blind eye to the depreciation, while other lenders don't even understand what real estate depreciation is, and they just see a big negative number and they're at a loss for words, and so they don't even know what to do. So finding a good lender in that case as well. So personal debt to income is just something to be aware of as you jump into this whole real estate game. Now, big picture, when we're talking about pathway to wealth, I'll give you my 3 big simple steps of pathway to wealth in my mind. I'm sure Paul can give you a week-long lesson on what he considers pathway to wealth as a personal financial advisor. But for me, it's really a 3-step process as you're thinking about this personally. The first one is get rid of high interest debt. So what do you consider high interest debt? Now, obviously that varies based on where we are in the interest rate cycle. For me, though, typically I'm looking above 6% is what I would consider high interest debt on my personal books. After that, once I've removed all my high interest debt, I'm looking at reserves. Reserves at this point from a personal financial perspective is also going to vary. Some people, this is true like your break glass in case of emergency kind of fund. If you haven't read Profit First, it's a fantastic book, and they talk about literally having these separate kind of bank accounts. And certain bank accounts you intentionally have at a separate bank that you almost never see. Because people have this kind of mentality. Even if you have all of your money in one account, you might have it allocated to different funds. If you see one large account, you have the mentality to think you have more money to play with than you actually do. And so the concept of reserves is, what is your true cost of living? Not just, hey, I can survive for these amount of months. Like, figure out what is your true cost of living. And then from there, some people want to start with a 3-month reserve or a 6-month reserve. Personally, I like the 12-month reserve. That's the runway that makes me comfortable. As far as the reserve side of the house. Now, for me, I started with removing high interest debt. Then after that, I had a 12-month reserve. The nice thing about having a 12-month reserve is I could fall on my face, and my family, I have a wife and 4 kids. We would be absolutely fine for an entire year, which is a runway long enough for me to figure myself out. So after that point is where everything I could went into investing. I initially started with a 3-month reserve. I was not that comfortable with it. I bumped to a 6-month reserve, started investing, and all of my profits kind of flowed back into that reserve fund until I hit that 12-month point, and then it was just full bore investing as much as we could. So anyways, that's a very, very quick kind of pathway to wealth when you're thinking about personal finances. A lot of people have asked me like, oh, I want to invest. I want to jump into real estate. I got 25 grand. I can jump into my first multifamily deal, or I'm going to throw this into syndication and really learn as from a limited partner perspective. I'm like, that's great, but you guys as syndicators currently, or soon to be syndicators in that case, or fund managers, whatever we kind of jump into, just realize, don't take every dollar from every investor you can, because sometimes the investors who are giving you the last dollar they can are end up being the biggest headaches of all of them. So I always ask the question to my investors, like, I'm not here to like give you financial advice by any means, but is this funds that you realize you don't need to access for 3 to 5 to 10 years potentially, depending on how this deal is going, because you don't want to use your investors' reserves. I'll let you guys do what you want, but I would not recommend you guys use your investors' reserves towards your personal investments. It just ends up being more of a headache, and they end up pinging you every other week to see what the status of things are because they're sweating.
Yeah, I always ask them, if a tree fell on your house tomorrow, are you going to be asking me for this money back? Is this like necessary funds? And most people are like, no. But if they say yeah, then I'd be like, oh, okay, well,
yeah,
probably not the best thing for you.
Exactly. So as you're looking at your personal books, do you understand your debt to income, like where you stand? We can talk ratios and stuff offline as far as what you need, and that's more of a personal residential purchase, not really the topic of discussion here. But as you are looking at your finances now, one of the things that when we jump into the commercial space, and we'll talk here next from business structure setup, is having a biography ready. And Reggie, I'll let you kind of talk to this briefly, because I know you've engaged with our biographies more than anything else. Anything you want to highlight specifically that they're looking with the biographies from the lender piece?
Well, a lot of lenders, so high level, they want to see two things. They want to see that you have experience with 3 multifamily properties for at least 2 years. And then, they want to make sure that, that you know what you're doing. So that's something that we ran into early on. It's like, we didn't have the experience, we weren't able to check the experience box. So, some of these lenders that we talked to wouldn't even talk to us about lending. But it's like a chicken or an egg situation, and that's one of the reasons why sometimes it makes sense to partner up with somebody who has a little bit more experience. But anytime now when we're going to pursue lending on a property, we submit 3 things: that schedule of real estate owned, our personal financial statements, and a biography. Because on the commercial side, they put a lot more weight on you personally than they do, say, like your debt to income ratio. They do look at it, but it's not a necessary qualification. Because mine didn't look that great when I started, because I had a lot of these investment loans in my personal name, which, I came into this uneducated. And so that was what part of this is. It's like some of this is learnings that we've all had at some point. Like, hey, I don't know why we were doing it this way, but I just learned to do it this way. But the biographies, it's kind of a necessary evil when it comes to the lending piece. If you don't like writing about yourself, just find a good picture, highlight your relevant experience. If you have business experience, if you have real estate experience, and if they have any questions, they'll follow up. But bio is important.
Yeah, we're not looking for a leather-bound novel about you either. You're looking, call it 200, 500 words kind of mentality of just kind of explaining who you are, what your background is, so the lender can get that warm fuzzy that you're not there going to steal their money, or you're going to screw the deal one way or another. So like I said, personal finance, this is more of a broad discussion right now of understanding why it's important. The last thing I'll throw out there is there are times as a general partner, when you guys start running these deals, that having a strong personal financial backing allows you to save the deal or keep a deal running without having to do a cash call. Because, in the current environment is a perfect way to illustrate that. I talked to some limited partners or some general partners a couple of weeks ago in their deal, where one of the GPs had to bring in $3.5 million to keep the deal going. They were losing $300,000 a month on this deal. And so that's a good example. Thinking about not just your GPs from an experience perspective, and we'll talk about KPs next week when we're talking about more real estate structure setup. But understanding having a strong personal financial background is great for multiple reasons. It really, you can save the day or keep deals afloat that otherwise you would have to reach out to your LPs and do a capital call, and that's something you always want to try to prevent as max to the max extent as possible.
Cool. I'd say you definitely want someone on 1 or 2 or 3 people on the GP team to have a strong financial like liquidity standpoint or something. You want someone to be strong, but it doesn't always necessarily have to be you, right? A lot of us are getting started in this business and maybe we don't have a lot of money starting out. So if you're broke, like I was, I came to the deal with Reggie and Matt with negative $60,000 balance on a previous investment. And so they were definitely my financial backing, my financial help to make sure that the deal was actually successful. So if you, for whatever reason, don't have that structure, I would say definitely work towards it, but it's not necessarily an inhibitor to closing a deal either.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Not a requirement, but just like anything in real estate, you can leverage others, whether it's time, money, or knowledge. You can always leverage somebody else to fill in the gap for one of them. All right, next one, personal entity setup. Okay. And this is not the real estate business structure. We're going to talk about that next week, get more in the weeds there. But this is your decision to have a personal entity that you are then going to run your aspects through. We kind of dived on this. I think we touched on this briefly last week. My recommendation, non-attorney, the classic caveat here, none of us are CPA. Well, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an attorney. My recommendation on this front would be to have an entity set up, a holding company that then has a company that is run by a company that runs your limited partner stuff and another company that runs your active business. So a passive business and an active business. So you're going to start with your holding company. Below that holding company, there'll be two other companies that one runs your active stuff, i.e. your asset management. Your other one runs your basically passive entities. The passive entity business in that case is going to have the least amount of liability and hopefully the highest amount of equity, because that's something you're growing, you're investing in. And so the likelihood of someone suing that entity and taking it for everything it has is extremely minimal, because that entity should only be involved in its limited capacity, meaning that's I can't even think whatever scenario will be. I'm sure there's some scenario where it could get sued if you do something wrong, but if you set up the entity properly, that's the one thing I would recommend. Now, from there, the holding company again is going to have another company that's going to run the active management piece. So for us, that's 3 Beach Capital, that we are the asset manager of our funds, and 3 Beach Capital is the active business. So that 3 Beach Capital has a liability concern that we have to be prepared for. We'll talk about insurance here in a second. Josh is going to cover that in the support piece, but just understanding kind of that flow. The reason we have a holding company, it just really then simplifies all your money, because all the money, most of these entities, all of these entities are going to be pass-through entities that flow up through the holding company, and that's what's going to pay everything out. If you guys get further along into more estate planning, that holding company can then be held by a trust. And that trust can then be, you can have trustees that you can pass it down, which prevents probate and really just simplifies if you were to die down the road and you have heirs you're trying to give stuff to, everything flows into that holding company and makes everything much easier in that regard. So it simplifies your life to have a very streamlined process. Now, the downside of getting a trust set up, getting a holding company set up, and getting multiple companies set up is there are expenses up front in order to do that. So it's a risk reward profile. Some people are going to tell you just on your first one, just get in your personal name, just kind of get the business going. And I don't want to say that's wrong, because again, I'm not an attorney, but my recommendation is just set the structure up from the beginning as correct as possible, because you're going to run into issues. Again, lessons learned from me and Josh and Reggie. Now I have like a good chunk of my companies are what I call dirty companies that don't have any anonymity, and they've kind of, mixed what does what between active and passive. And it's just, they're not as clean. Where I've finally set up a trust out of Wyoming, and that trust, there's a holding company in Wyoming that's owned by a trust, and that gives me anonymity, and also is everything that's derived from that entity will then have anonymity as well as protection, because I'll be setting it up appropriately. So it's a little bit, what I'm trying to say is set it up early, the proper way, because unraveling your mistakes of the past make it more difficult. There's that. There are some companies we could, I could recommend that I've used. I use Prime Corporate Services for my setup. There's a ton of companies out there. It's if you follow Pace Morby, that's who he recommends, and they've been great so far. Paul, I see you laughing.
Because I called Prime from Pace, and I had scheduled a time with them and discussed it with them as well. So I was just going to ask you, who would you recommend? But
yeah. I Googled, there's a company, there's a ton of them out there as far as corporate structure setups.
Yeah, I mean, I scheduled, I don't know, 6 different calls with 6 different CPAs, and as well as who do you recommend for attorneys that can do this? And pretty much a lot of them was like, you could do the Delaware, you could do the Wyoming, things of that sort. So yeah, it's good stuff. They're pretty professional too, by the way.
Yeah, they've been great. As far as costs, one of the other things to realize when you're getting these set up, if your goal is anonymity, meaning you want people to, you want to make it as difficult as people to sue you as possible, if for some reason they are trying to track you down, or if you have tenants that are trying to track down who the owner is of a property and trying to go down that, you want to prevent your tenants from finding out who you are. Not that you're trying to do anything wrong, it's just you want to prevent that hassle for you down the road. Where was I going with that? Anonymity. Totally just had a brain fart. Anyways, we'll keep going if I remember what I was going to say. Next thing is going to be the privacy piece, which is going to be included. And like we were talking about, there are certain states out there that you can get your entity set up in order to have the max amount of privacy possible. Protection is the same thing as far as liability. This whole thing is one more layer. Doesn't prevent your need to buy insurance, which we'll talk about, but it is something you do need to do as an additional layer of protection to prevent getting sued. All right, business credit. So this is the other piece. So prime corporate services as well, like Paul and I were just talking about. They also have another line that does help you set up your business credit. You can do this on your own as well. If you have a brand new LLC, you have the ability to go what they call Duns and Bradford and get a DUNS number, or DINS number. That number is effectively kind of your credit number for your LLC. And so the way getting your business credit set up, what you're going to do, you get the DUNS number by going to Duns and Bradstreet online, and you can just register your LLC from there. From there, you want to sign up with some level 1 accounts, and we can hook you up with the accounts that are recommended. And it's effectively either credit cards through like airlines, which are going to be business credit cards, or it's going to be net 30 accounts through companies like the companies that create t-shirts and hats online. They'll give you what they call net 30 accounts. So it's not a credit card, but you can pay for it, and then within 30 days you pay them back. But the whole point of having these specific starter accounts that they call them, you can slowly build your corporate credit with a brand new entity with these level 1 accounts. And if you spend a certain amount of money over the first 4 months or so, 5 months, 6 months, you can then go to what they call level 2 accounts, which then can unlock 50 to 200 to 500 or even $1 million in credit lines with your entities. And so the nice thing about having business credit early on is that you're able to leverage that to fill in the gaps if needed for your businesses. For instance, my RV park in Florida, that one, if we wanted to redo the roads, we could pull from our business line of credit rather than pulling from the general partners, the owners, and having to drop the $200,000 in order to redo the roads. We can just use our line of credit and then have the tenants effectively pay that off without having any needed cash out of our own. You can even leverage that to buy other properties as well. But again, just like anything, anytime you're leveraging your own money or your own sources, always do it wisely. Always make sure you have the proper reserves and you're protecting yourself in that regard. All right. The last piece is going to be the business personal separation. As much as you can, even if you're going to do everything under your personal name, I would highly, highly, highly recommend having a separate credit card and or business account to run all of your business operations through versus your personal checking account. There is what they call commingling of funds, which if you were to try to get, if you were to get sued and you go to court and they're trying to say, hey, is this a legitimate business, but you're running everything out of the same account and commingling funds, mixing money, if you will, that's a big no-no when it comes to the business side of the house. Most of us will do it early on. It's tough to avoid doing that early on just because you're just not used to it. But again, the whole point of this is getting yourself set up early as possible in the correct way as possible. For instance, Josh and Reggie and I were starting a new entity, and we're really not charging anything to the expenses until we threw in a certain amount of cash into this account to start the entity up. And then after that, we're getting a debit card. We're going to run everything through that one operating account. We're going to try to not to commingle that fund with other entities or anything like that, just because you're trying to start as pure as possible with our entities there. Josh, Reggie, any additional kind of fill-ins you guys want to talk about as far as personal entity setup?
No, I like the business credit thing that you said too, though, because it's been something that I've seen help us, as well as I've seen it help a lot of other investors. And I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it to you guys before, but the whole line of credit thing that one of my podcast interviewees did, and he was able to scale exponentially and got some incredibly great terms on a business line of credit, which I know they're not necessarily all that incredible right now, but they're massively beneficial, especially if you know you don't have a lot of liquidity.
Well, even in today's market, you can get, $500,000 for 0 interest for the first 15 months. I mean, it's still out there for these lines of credit.
Really? Where do you get
Yeah.
that at?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that follow-up question.
No, it's, I mean, I just talked to a guy at the, I spoke at a meetup up in Panama City Beach 3 weeks ago, whenever I was up there. And he had just pulled a line of credit for $1 million, and he said it was either 0 or 1%. Like, it was super duper low on his line of credit. So they're still out there for sure. Cool. So anyways, that's personal entity stuff. Josh, let's go over support.
Hey, can I ask a quick question real quick?
Yeah.
So, when you guys were starting out before you purchased your first asset, did you build a budget for the business expenses before you had a property to budget for?
No,
Not really.
we didn't. Like, did we build a business plan and a business budget? No, we effectively, our entire goal was a successful syndication. I was thrown in last minute into the mix, I'll be honest. So I was already into where they had it was basically a fully cooked meal, and I just came and I put salt on it and helped finish the meal off.
Gotcha.
So yeah, we didn't come in with a full business plan in that sense.
I thought you were gonna say spice. Salt just
I
makes it
couldn't
seem.
think. I try to be witty with my analogies, but sometimes it comes out bland. Cool.
Oh, well, as far as support goes, early on, accounting's obviously a huge factor. Getting some, which kind of ties into bookkeeping in a way, some kind of personal bookkeeper or larger scale accountant, whether that be even on the business side or on your personal side. Even if you think you're really great at accounting and you feel like it's a super simple task, shouldn't take you much time, that may be the case. But let's say 3 years down the road from now, when you're still doing it yourself and you've got $100 million of assets under management and so many different entities and different accounts and money just funneling everywhere, and you're still trying to do it yourself, it's going to be really difficult to try to get a bookkeeper to come in and take that over, understand what the heck is going on, make sense of it all. Because then once they make sense of it all, then it's simple. But the transition there is going to be really difficult. So all I would say for that is just to try to get an accountant or get a bookkeeper as soon as possible to keep your maybe not even necessarily your personal books, because if I'm being completely honest with you, I still keep my personal books, but entity level books. So like when I created Ferrari Capital, who owns, my percentage of 3 Beach, I have someone that keeps the books in Ferrari Capital. And then once we created 3 Beach between the three of us, then we had to get someone who kept the books for 3 Beach. And then you buy a deal, and now you have to get someone to keep the books for the deal. Like, there's all these different entities, and you have to keep books of every single individual one of them. And you don't want to do the commingling like we were just talking about. And it gets very cumbersome and time consuming when you're trying to do it all yourself. Another thing that I would say, maybe you're thinking I'm not going to do it myself. When I buy my first deal, I'll just have the property manager do all of my accounting. Another terrible idea that you don't want to do, because property managers are not accountants. They are property managers. Oftentimes, the people that you'll hire that'll actually be doing the accounting have never been accountants before in their entire life and probably don't even have a lot of property management experience. So they're going to end up royally screwing you, and your books are not going to be kept very well, much at all, which is then going to ruin NOI, and it's going to ruin valuations, and it's going to ruin depreciation, and it's going to ruin everything. So the best thing is just to get a quality accountant, quality bookkeeper as soon as you can. We actually have a bookkeeper that handles pretty much we have one bookkeeper that handles all of our properties, right? And they handle 3 Beach and some personal stuff. But then we have an actual CPA that handles all of our, end of the year, top level accounting that finalizes all of our K1s and just taxable information.
Why are they not the same person?
It's a great question.
It can be. Our CPA is he's a partner at a firm, and honestly, it just comes down to financially, it just doesn't make sense to have a bookkeeper pay that much for a bookkeeper when really a good bookkeeper really just counts the beans, right? She does a good job of keeping us in track of understanding where each dollar goes. And they'll every month or every week, however often you want to engage with your bookkeeper, That's totally up to you. Obviously, the more you engage with your bookkeeper, the more expensive it's going to be. But all in all, we'll pay anywhere from per entity $50 per month on the low end up to $200 in the high end ish per entity per month from a bookkeeper. And that's depending on how much level of engagement we need. And it doesn't make sense to have my CPA who charges much more hourly to do the same task that my bookkeeper did.
Wait, you're saying $50 in total per month
Correct.
for a bookkeeper?
Yeah.
Per entity.
How many
Correct.
bookkeepers where are you sourcing just bookkeepers like that?
So this was I'll recommend in most things in this business is exactly kind of what Paul was alluding to earlier when he was talking about attorneys. I highly leverage our network, and anytime we're looking for anything, I'll leverage the network that we've built and ask around. I'll ask for recommendations, like who's got a bookkeeper, who's got a bookkeeper, who's got a bookkeeper. And a lot of people are like, I got one, she's good, but man, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to call her. I got one, yeah, he does all right. He doesn't speak English very well, but he's on top of it. Okay, sweet. I'll give him a call and we'll see what he can do. We kind of go down the line. And the one that we currently have was a recommendation from one of our partners, kind of doing that same thing. We were like, we got to figure out this bookkeeping thing. At the time, we had whoever that was doing the books, and it was a struggle. The books weren't clean. And then again, just like untying your personal entity, if you do it wrong up front and then having to backtrack. Same thing with a book, man. It's a massive headache to go back and be like, oh, what was that $50,000 wire for on that that happened 6 to 9 months ago? That went from Fred to George. Like, I don't know. And then you got to backtrack everything. So yeah, paying for a proper bookkeeper up front, I think it definitely pays dividends in the long run.
Yeah, it's really difficult too when you have IRA investors come in, because oftentimes the IRA wires that flow in don't have people's names on them. They just have a bunch of digits. So you see a $50,000 wire and you're like, I have no idea who wired this. And you're 2 years down the road trying to figure it out.
And they also will help you unravel if you do accidentally commingle. So let's say as an example, let's say I was, especially if you have the bookkeeper who has everything properly. We're going to kind of get more into the real estate structure, but we'll talk about it because it affects us personally. If you have, so let's say 3 Beach is supposed to pay, the 3 of our entity, Ross Residential, Mage Capital, which is my personal entity, and then Ferrari Capital, and then we're supposed to be getting paid personally. But let's say we forgot that 1 month, and then we just get paid personally from 3 Beach directly to Reggie, directly to Josh, and directly to me. A good bookkeeper could then do her bookkeeper magic to show the money flow to the right direction. She can access both entities' books and she'll flow it through, and so it'll look as if the money flowed to the right direction. And it's completely legal too. It's not like they're doing anything illegal. It's just really truly cleaning up the bookkeeping side of the house to make it happen. So they're not just there just to count beans. They're there to save the day when you need it.
Yeah, and I'll just real quick, a great example of the value they bring. One of our properties, we had to put these significant down payments for utilities. I think it was like $20,000 a building, and there were, or no, it wasn't that much. But it was all together. I think it was about $80,000 for water, just deposits for the water service. Well, we did that, and we basically paid electronically. Our bank sent certified checks to the municipality. Well, fast forward a few months, this was right basically at the close of the transaction. And so a lot of stuff going on, right? There's a transition where, money changing hands. About two or 3 months later, our bookkeeper comes to us and says, hey, I think I found some money that you guys are supposed to be refunded. And sure enough, the municipality drafted an extra $20,000 from our bank account. It was unauthorized. So we reached out to them. They refunded the money, but that was one of those. That was a really big, fine. And so that I think she proved out her ROI right then and there. Don't you, Matt?
Yeah.
Literally. As far as VAs, personal assistants go, I have a VA. She's kind of like an executive assistant, handles a lot of just minutia admin stuff. As well as she really does all of my social media. So I still actually craft all of my personal social media content and post it, kind of like curate the content. Well, she does all the liking, and she does all the commenting, all the direct message responses, all the KPI tracking and like follow-ups of who to communicate with. And this person that commented on my post 3 months ago, they said they wanted such and such information. Did we ever give them that information? Yeah, we did. Okay, let's touch base with them, see if they liked the information, see blah, 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 whatever. So like she does all of the follow-ups. It equally is beneficial when you start getting into really trying to nail down your capital raising efforts. You're looking at trying to get some more passive investors flowing in. And you try to figure out potentially even like what posts are working and what posts aren't working. You know, this post had only got, when you look at LinkedIn, you actually get to see the amount of impressions and views each post individually gets. So it's like, well, this one only got, 2,000 views and I only got like 3 comments on this one. But this one over here where I posted a picture of my face, this one got like 15,000 views and tons of comments. And I got a ton of actual leads from that. And then you can go back and you can look at where the leads that you received from that actually viable leads. I don't know, it's a lot. We won't get into all the weeds. That's for another time. But VAs, personal assistants are fantastic. They can do all different kinds of things, like even just separate your email, funnel all of your emails into different like folders and categories, read through all the spam, get rid of all that so you can just see what's actually important. They can do all of your scheduling for you. And they're extremely inexpensive. Now, I'll let Matt talk in a second here about the personal assistant he has, because he actually has one that lives or used to live very local to him that did a lot of other stuff. But for me, as far as VAs go, someone that's not local, they're extremely inexpensive. Literally cost me about $1,000 for the recruiting company. It's a company called SOS, is like sourcing online services or something like that. Literally $1,000 for them to do all the recruiting work and everything. And then they give me a couple of options, a couple of leads, like 3 people. And then I actually got to interview those 3 people. And of course, if I didn't like anyone, then they just find me 3 new people. But I did like one. I ultimately hired the individual and they've been nothing but fantastic ever since. And they literally only cost you, depending on where you get, right? You can get a VA from literally anywhere. My VA just so happens to be from the Philippines. They speak great English. They're very, very high work ethic, and cost of living is extremely low, which is why they're very inexpensive. So my cost for that employee is like $6 an hour. So at $6 an hour, it's a couple $100 a month. And she saves me countless time. Can't tell you how many times I've like posted something. You guys have seen it. Some of you probably even commented on some of my posts where I'll post something and I'll get like 500 comments on a post. Who's responding to 500 comments? Not me. No one has time for that. So she's responding to every one of those comments, and she's making sure that they're getting the information if they commented specifically for information, or she's making sure that all of that information is then tracked and put in a KPI system somewhere so that I can know why they commented, who they are, how do they actually flow and funnel into my business. Anyway, lifesaver. Then lastly, well, actually, before we go on to the next one, Matt, you can talk about the actual personal assistant that you had that was local.
Yeah, sure. And you talk to the VA kind of hiring process. There's a bunch of different options out there to hire VAs. If you guys have not jumped into this world yet, realize that you are managing a person though. These are people on the other end. So treat them as such. A lot of people kind of just use and abuse their VAs, hire and fire at will. And it's kind of sad the way a lot of VAs get treated. So any chance you get, just realize, a little $100 bonus here and there kind of goes a long way to really treat them and show them that you really do appreciate what they're doing. You can go to hired VAs in primarily 2 different ways. Well, 3 different ways. One, you can go just find them organically. The other way is going to be using a headhunting service, like Josh said. I use Sphere Rocket, so I pay an annual subscription, and then they'll hire as many VAs as I want for me. But the nice thing about Sphere Rocket is the fact that I pay the guys directly. So I pay my VAs directly. The other one's going to be a headhunting service that doesn't charge you much up front or nothing up front, but they're going to make a cut of every dollar that VA works. And so rather than paying $6, $7, or $8 an hour, you might be paying $9, $10, or $11 an hour, but that service is making $2 to $3 to $4 an hour off their cut. So just realize there's different ways to hire VAs out there, and they can do a vast majority of everything in your life, which is crazy. Personal assistants, this is going to be determined. So like, and sorry, is it Samer? I want to know how to pronounce your name.
Samer.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So Sammer, as an example, you're going out to Raleigh because you want to get boots on the ground because you that's where you want to invest, somewhere in the East Coast. Because you're trying to invest locally, I mean, that's potentially a good option to get a personal assistant if you start to grow your kind of portfolio and your exposure in your local area. And the nice thing about a personal assistant, it's a really good first local hire that can really do anything for you. My first personal assistant, she went from everything where at first it was all business oriented, but I hired her as a personal assistant to where eventually she got to the point that she was taking my kids to and from school sometimes, or taking their after school activities, to where then I could focus on the business. So rather than being in traffic for an hour, she was out there doing those kind of personal tasks for me. So the opportunities are endless when it comes to that. If you're seeking specifically, I talk about the investing triad. There's time, money, and knowledge, right? There's some people who have all the time in the world and they're seeking money and knowledge. They're seeking ways to learn. So my very first personal assistant, she was a fresh out of college. She just graduated from University of Central Florida, and she said, "Hey, I want to learn about real estate." And so she worked for me for super cheap. And for the next year, she was learning, she was making money. And then at that year, at end of the first year, she was huge, and she ended up becoming an agent and becoming more of a partner than an assistant. And then I hired another personal assistant. So anyways, that's why I'll throw personal assistants.
Okay, and then insurance. So the insurance piece is really more so specific to actually asset specifics, which we'll cover more in depth, much more basic knowledge there on, I think it was part 5 or something like that. But
yeah,
as far as high level of insurance goes, just making sure that you have someone that actually understands the insurance market, has your best interest at heart, so to say, for that specific asset, and can properly read an insurance quote or claim or something of the sort. Actually fully understands how all of that functions, how all of that operates. Because you could get a quote that is a lot cheaper than the next guy. You could have one quote that costs you 50 grand for the year for coverage, and you can have another one that comes in that only costs you 30 grand for the year for coverage. And you're immediately looking at it and you're like, wow, $20,000 savings per year in coverage. This is fantastic. But if you actually looked at the coverage, you'd see that it's terrible and you're basically self-insuring. So you might as well pay the extra 20 grand. So someone that can actually read it, because insurance is really unnecessarily confusing. And the more you get into it, the more it just, the more confusing I feel like it gets, the different ways that it's structured. And there's a handful of different ways to structure it. Master policies, loss limit policies, friggin', I can't even think of them all, but there's so many different options. What we've basically done up to this point is just gone on a case-by-case basis. Every property gets its own personal insurance coverage. And if it's a portfolio, then we try to cover that particular portfolio, like 2 or 3 properties or something. But we're starting to realize, especially along the coast, that it makes more sense to need to group them together. And now you need scale to be able to do that, although there are ancillary ways to also be able to do that. You can have a potential property manager who has a massive master policy of like 30,000 plus units, then you can get included on their policy. Although there's pros and cons there as well, because what if you get included on their policy, they manage your property for 6 months to a year, they suck, you fire them. Now what are you going to do? You underwrote that you were going to have this great, ridiculously cheap discount for this master policy with this property manager that you no longer have. And so there's definitely some ebbs and flows of how to effectively do underwriting when it comes to looking at insurance. But high level, it's just something that I recommend potentially getting a broker for. And you also don't want to mass search for insurance. That's one thing that I would say. You don't want to try to go out to the open market and get like 17 different brokers to quote 17 different properties or different companies, because probably what they're going to end up doing is they're all going to be going to the same companies. And once one person quotes it, that all the other brokers are basically locked out of quoting coverage from that particular company. So I would say go to 1 or 2 brokers and stick with that.
It's
Yeah,
also
I mean,
bad etiquette.
Yeah, my big thing here from the personal side of the house was just understanding personally how you protect yourself. Consider a general liability coverage, which is fairly cheap. to protect you just from one more layer of getting sued. You can get a couple million in general liability policy for not too much. And again, the whole point of insurance in general is just to make you sleep at night. So if you feel like you need it, and it's not that expensive, I would recommend just getting yourself covered. It's a good CYA.
Yeah, and guys, if you're storing sensitive information for some of your investors, social security numbers, addresses, that type of thing, you should probably consider cyber insurance. So if you get hacked, there's some type of identity theft, your investors could be pretty pissed. So that'd be one way to mitigate against that potentially. But that's one of the newer ones that our agent has recommended to us.
Yeah. All right, jumping into the actual documents themselves, we'll kind of walk you through. I'll let Reggie. I can turn this off if you want to run. Is it on your computer, or do you want me to run it?
If you don't mind driving.
Sure, happy to drive.
I'm still getting learned this this new computer here.
First one up, schedule asset statement, schedule of real estate owned.
Yeah, so this is pretty easy. I alluded to this earlier, but when you approach a lender, you're going to want to have three things prepared. You're going to want to have this schedule of real estate owned, your personal financial statement, and some type of bio statement for them to kind of look over. And the schedule of real estate, I mean, this is pretty straightforward. They just want a list of all the real estate you own, including your primary residence. And they all, some banks will give you their own documents to use, hey, fill this out. But nowadays, kind of how we operate, we just found one that we liked. And so when we're ready to go approach a lender, we just, we have this thing pre-populated. We might update it once a quarter or so. And it's usually because I'm bugging, Josh and Matt about it. But I guess I'm the bean counter of the bunch in some ways. But the bank will look at this. And so, they just, what they're going to do is, because on your personal bank statement, or I'm sorry, on your personal financial statement, this shows up again. And don't ask me why they want it separately and also duplicated on your personal financial statement, but they do. So, if you just start filling this thing out, keep it updated periodically. Most lenders will want to see a schedule of real estate and a personal financial statement that is dated within 6 months of today's date. So at the very minimum, you should probably update it every 5 or 6 months. And so this is, so I guess one distinction between this and what you'll see on the PFS is that this asks for actual market value, actual cost, actual mortgage balances. But notice it doesn't mention your equity interest in the property. All right, so that'll come into play on the PFS. Anybody have any questions about the schedule of real estate? It's mostly self-explanatory, but feel free to ask if there's something that was unclear. All right.
Totally a simple document, guys. The biggest thing here is if you just start early, these little things you will have to keep updated, but it's easy to forget, how much you paid for a property or, the date you acquired it, like little things like that. There's just much easier just to get this stuff updated. Like Reggie said, we try to update ours quarterly, definitely at least every 6 months. And we typically have to update it anytime we're looking to get underwritten for a deal anyway. So keep up with it is my recommendation. Super simple. All right. Next, the bigger guy, personal financial statement.
Yeah, this one has a little more moving pieces and parts. It's kind of broken out into sections. But it's basically your personal balance sheet. So anybody with a finance background, there's the big financial statements. The two big ones are income statement, balance sheet. This is your personal balance sheet, and everything that you do, personal and business, flows onto this. So this is it. This is where the buck stops. So again, you'll just want to fill out, all the personal information. If you have a partner, a spouse that's going to join you in the endeavor, and you want them to underwrite them as well, include them on there, and you can include all assets that they may own in their individual name. All right, you can scroll down a little bit.
Their birthday was like 1899. It's great.
Yeah, it's like Methuselah, like great grandmother. So big picture, this is broken down into three sections: assets. Well, actually, it's just two, but you have assets, and so this can be cash, bonds, real estate that you own. I mean, you can see some of the categories that are on ours right here. But they break out personal residence. Other personal property. This is going to be things that, if you have some toys, you got a jet ski, or if you own something of significant value that you want included in your net worth calculation, this is where you would put it. So it adds all that up. All right, great. John Smith, who I used as an example here, he's got about $2.7 million in assets. Sounds great, right? Well, your net worth is just your assets minus whatever liabilities you have. And liabilities are things that you pay out instead of receive. And so this can include anything from, technically, if you owe your parents $20,000 from that year you spent off in Europe, then you should probably include that on here if you want to be technically correct. But they break it out into secured and unsecured credit, like lines of credit, notes payable. I've actually used this one because we do a lot of seller financing. So sometimes we have owner finance notes. What else? Accounts payable. That's like, it's your personal credit cards. And again, hopefully as you move through your real estate career, hopefully your credit card debt will all but disappear. And then all your real estate mortgages, any mortgages. So this is the total of all the balances that you owe. And I don't want to, beat this dead horse here, but basically, like when you have all your assets, all your liabilities, you take the difference between the two, and that's your net worth. So this particular example, a little over $1 million in liabilities, you end up with a net worth of about $1.7 million. So actually not too bad. And what you want to see is about 2x assets, whatever your liabilities are. So if you have $200,000 in assets, you should probably have no more than about $100,000 in liabilities. And the bank kind of considers that kind of a healthy space to be in. The contingent liabilities, this is a little bit more nuanced. This is where you signed on a loan as a guarantor. So, whatever you owe on your house note, and then any real estate loans where you signed off on a guarantee. So if you don't have non-recourse agency debt, then you're going to have some type of guarantee. We have loans where we are 100% obligated on that money, and we have some loans where we have partial recourse. And so it's not just an either or situation. There's some in between scenarios too. But the bank looks at this because these are things like these are uncertainties, things that could happen, but require like some multiple uncertainties to kind of firm up, I guess. And so it includes balances, but it could also include capital calls if you're if you have a tax debt, let's just say, but it's in court and you dispute it, you still have to list it on there, things like that. And the bank wants to see this as low as possible. So that's why in real estate, your ultimate goal is to go agency. Page 2. And guys, feel free to stop me if I'm kind of blowing through this. I just want to make sure we're able to get through all the material. Now, some of you guys, y'all recognize this. This is just, some of the income that you receive. And, they do want to look at your income. They want to look at how many dependents you have, if you have an executor for your will. All these things the bank does take into account. It's, some of it's rather intangible, but, it paints a picture for the lender. And ultimately, when they're deciding to give you a loan or not, they take your file to a loan committee, and they sit in a room with, a few executives, and they literally decide whether to give you a loan or not. And so the picture you paint for them, you have control over that. And you have to think about what the bank would want to see on here when you're trying to figure out, like, what improvements you might can make to your own PFS. And so if you scroll down, it starts to have some of the schedules that you saw on that first page. This kind of breaks it out. So this guy, he has 20,000 in cash, not too bad. He's got a little bit of Bitcoin, which isn't doing so great right now, but that's what the market value might look like. Then any non-marketable securities. So syndications fall under this category because they are a security, but they're not marketable. They're not easily transferable. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to even sell shares to somebody within the syndication itself. So this would kind of be a place to list some of those assets. Page 3. So this is just continuation. And again, this just flows back to page 1 on that assets and liabilities form. So this is where life insurance might come into play. Now, this is where some of the nuance starts to come in. So like on the insurance, for example, unless you have the type of policy where there's a cash value, do not report it as an asset because it's not acceptable. It doesn't conform. But if it has cash value, you can claim it. And I don't know a whole lot about that area, but that's what I do know about insurance with regards to the PFS here. All right, Schedule 5. This is where you'll get a little deja vu because you've already filled out your schedule of real estate owned. You're like, man, why am I have to do this all over again? But this is where you show your actual ownership in the property. And so a lot of times what you're going to do is prorate everything on the PFS according to your ownership interest. So if you only own 5% in that company, then you can only claim 5% of the rental proceeds or 5% of the loan balance on your liability. So make sure that everything is pro rata. Now, if your operating agreement in that specific entity spells out something different, I mean, you can account for that. But basically, this is where you kind of parse everything out. So you don't want to artificially inflate your numbers because the bank could think that you're either acting in a fraudulent manner, or they could think that you don't know what you're doing. And so either of those is kind of a red flag for them. So you got to make sure this stuff is right because they look at these all day long. And then scrolling down, these are just notes payable, and this is usually where I put some of those promissory notes, the owner finance debt. Like right now, we got owner financing on some land, and we have a note that's actually coming due, I think, in a month or two. Got a 6-month delay there, but this is where you would account for those types of loans. And then if you're really wanting to dot the I's and cross the T's, then you would sign this and perhaps get it certified by your CPA or your bookkeeper if they're able to. But that's kind of the PFS in a nutshell. It's useful. It's admittedly a pain in the butt to keep updated. It's a little tedious, but you can't make changes to something you don't track. And if you're really literally invested in increasing your net worth, this is where you track it at. And so it has other uses outside of just lending and can help you track your net worth and see where you might need to make changes. But anyway, this is one of those core documents that you'll have to fill out a lot and see a lot. So make sure you're familiar with it. And I think this is the best and easiest one that we've found to use so far.
Yeah, I'll throw in there again, same thing. This is a pain to fill out the first time. And it's even painful to update, but it's much less painful to update than it is to fill out the first time. So trying to just hack through it the first time, especially if your life is simple right now, if you have a single income, your expenses, it's easy to understand where money's coming in, where money's flowing to, and as far as your equity ownership and whatever you have. And so anyways, I'll just, again, highlight one more time, do it up front now, get your stuff sorted. And that way it's just very easy to edit as you go along from there.
Reggie,
Any questions?
I was going to ask Reggie, did we get a chance to templatize our easy PFS calculator?
I did not. That was going to take a little bit more elbow grease because I have it set up specifically for me and you and Matt, and I want to make it generic so that other people can come in, use it, and adjust it without having to make major changes to it. But some of those back of the envelope calculations, for instance, if you're in a partnership, put together a separate spreadsheet so that you can calculate your percentages and kind of does it automatically by with just a few inputs, and then you can just transfer it to the PFS there. But again, you're probably getting a feel for how convoluted it can be. But if you're going to syndicate, you're getting into real estate, the numbers are important. So a few nickels and dimes add up to $1 is what I always say. And if you're not tracking, then you won't know that they're not there.
Well, that's it, guys. overall for personal business basics today, kind of talking about big picture financing stuff, understanding where you stand from a debt to income, understanding, a quick roadmap to wealth and my perspective, talking about entity structure setup and support, and then kind of really get into the docs that are going to be important as we get into the more real estate company structure. So we'll open it up now for any Q&A you guys might have.
Hey Matt, it's Oliver. I have a question going back to what you were explaining with the holding company and then the two structures underneath.
Yeah.
So I understand the active structure where you have the syndication business, but I'm not super clear on the second structure. Is it only if you invest like as a LP in like other syndications, or what exactly is this second structure? Since we're, let's assume we're all syndicators. So what's the second structure for?
So you'll have your holding company, which is going to be your main holding company. From there, this is my recommendation again. You'll have an active company and you have more of a passive company. This active company is going to be for things like asset management. You can also, this could be, really just be kind of GP ownership, which would kind of be hand in hand here as well. Some people are going to have a separate asset management company, but it's not the way I run it. We just have one active company. But really any sort of active business that has, this one's going to have more liability in that sense. So the goal for this business, you want this active business at the end of every month, end of every week, whatever you can, to be worth $0, to have no money to it. Because if you were to get sued, you want this company to be worth nothing, and ideally all the money flows into your holding company. All right, so this company, if something were to happen, this is the liability, and if someone were to come sue you, that goes away. You can replace that with another asset management, with another active company if needed. Your holding company should be protected, and your passive company should be protected. The passive company, like I was saying, this is if you want to buy into your shares, so buy some LP shares. You could buy as many LP shares into as many entities as you want, because the likelihood of any LP shares being sued and this passive company being liable, like let's say for some reason something crazy happens. Let's say this passive company also now owns a short-term rental. So let's say this passive company, we'll call it ABC LLC. ABC LLC owns, you put $50,000 into an investment over here as a limited partner. You put another $100,000 here as a limited partner. You threw in another, $200,000 here as a limited partner. And these are all fine and dandy, but then you buy a $1 million short-term rental. So $1 million here, you buy this. You have a slip and fall. Someone sues you. Now they're suing the short-term rental owner, which is this passive management company. They could try to sue you and take your shares because this company now has ownership in these shares. So in order to prevent that, I try to have this passive company only own shares and limited liability things. If you wanted to start a short-term rental management company, you could, if you wanted to, or not company, a short-term rental management investment, you could put it into your active company. Really, at that point, I would just recommend another one, an STR LLC, that then owns your short-term rental investment. Does that make sense?
It does. The only thing I don't understand is on the GP side, you said that this active entity can own a GP side. If you're successful, the GP portion can be worth a lot of money, right? If it's your own syndication and the GP, you added $1 million in your deal and you have 30% GP equity, it can be a lot. So how do you make that go down to zero? Like meaning you want it to be worth zero.
Yeah, that's true. And in that case, it wouldn't be worth zero. If something were to happen, you're right in that case.
Well,
the thing.
so
go ahead. Go right.
Real quick, in this case, and this is how we have a lot of our deals structured, more of our recent deals. The holding company, they own the property, they sign on the loan, but that active entity, I think we lovingly call it the M entity most of the time.
Yeah.
That is a management or the active part of the entity. So usually the balance on that particular account will be zero unless we transfer funds from H to the A in this example. And so once we've done that, we each take our distributions, and so that money never sits in there for more than a day or so. And so if you truly just looked at that A entity, on any given day, it's going to be worth zero.
Yeah,
But
we're kind of confusing the two as well, because this is, I'm talking more personal entity setup, but you're exactly right. I mean, we're going to talk next week in a real estate company structure, because what he's talking about now is the actual, the GP ownership. If I can, let me just clear this, clear all drawings. So what Reggie was talking about is the actual, property itself, our little apartment complex. The property itself is going to be owned by a holding company, but really we manage everything, what we call through our M company, but it's our more active company for the sake of this argument. This is more real estate structure setup. So that's a little bit different. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but to Reggie's point, whenever we had our original, my personal holding company, which is owned by my trust. From there, we have an active company that runs things actively, my passive company. Because this active company is owning portions of the M company, like it can get a little convoluted there. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's tough to have an asset management company go to zero, because if this active company owns part of the holding company, this is why I also have a general liability policy to protect me there as well. On top of the asset itself is going to have an insurance policy. So we try to protect ourselves with multiple levels of both entity structure as well as insurance. I hope that clears it up a little bit.
Yeah, no, it does. I guess the point was that, yeah, it's not, in reality, it's not zero. There's probably some value in the GP.
Yeah.
But I understand the fact of, as Reggie was saying, you don't leave that money for a long time. Like you transfer it to the holding company when you can.
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, as a GP ownership, if the ship's hurting, the ship's getting taken on water, GP ownership is worth negative dollars, right? Like because you need to pay money to sell the asset, and that's not a position you want to be in. So I don't want people to always think of GP ownership as, hey man, I make money if I want to take as much GP equity as possible. Like, yeah, I want GP equity, but I want GP equity in deals that are going to be profitable, because otherwise you're taking on a big chunk of liability that you may not want.
Sure.
That's a good question though. What else you guys got question wise?
I have a follow-up on that. First, I want to say, Rory, you should have been an art teacher, man. 10 out of 10 drawings.
Dude, that was great. I was gonna say the windows, man.
Yeah.
They started semi-rectangular, they went circles. I'm not an artist.
But so here's the question. If you find a good attorney, will they usually structure all of that well for you? That whole entity structure?
I'll be honest with you, man. Attorneys are good at protecting you. It's very tough to find a good attorney who understands the business model and is proactively saving the day for you. I mean, our attorney is great. I love Kenneth, and I hope he can come on next week so you guys get to meet him and we can talk. But Kenneth is a really good defensive mechanism. But a lot of our attorneys, I've not met a very good proactive attorney. Like a lot of the questions we get proactively is because we're prompting him about something that we're concerned about, and we're trying to be proactively involved. And I'll let Reggie kind of fill in the blanks in that one as well if you got any other fill-ins.
Yeah, I mean, in general, what you're saying is true. It's hard. Like, you can have a great attorney, and if they don't understand some of the idiosyncrasies with real estate and how the business could be structured, there can be a disconnect there. Like our attorney, he knows why we structure these like we do. And what's good about him is he also does other syndication. So he can share, sometimes he can share other things that he's seen. But what he's done is he started to share this structure with some of his other clients because he's a real big fan of it now, now that he's been doing this for several years and, kind of knows the ins and outs. But it is hard. And sometimes, attorneys, they're, a lot of times they're billed by the hour, and, they're not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to think through. I mean, unless you had an attorney on payroll who was completely dedicated to you, this attorney's, he's got other stuff on the plate. He might have to prepare for a deposition. He may, his client may be getting sued, and he may have other irons in the fire. And so he's going to give you what you ask for. He might do a great job at it, but unless you push and poke and prod, he might not give you any more. And
I will throw out a caution here, guys. A lot of the bigger groups, bigger multifamily groups out there that you can be like a mentor of or mentee of if you want to join them. They will force you to use their broker, their mortgage broker, their insurance broker, as well as their attorney, which seems like a great thing. Like, hey man, I'm part of X group. I'm not going to name out any names. I'm part of X group. Next group, man, they're doing 100 closings a year, and they got, you know, $11 billion in real estate assets. They got to be streamlined. They got to be great. It seems great until you realize a lot of these bigger groups it's more of a mass production for them. And when they do that, you get pushed, you have to use a certain attorney. And I've heard some horror stories of attorneys, you know, not protecting their clients and having their clients sign things that they should not have signed. And same thing from the mortgage broker side. They're getting forced to use this mortgage broker that's really not reading the mortgage documents. And next thing you know, their money is put in a lockbox that they can't access for 2 years after they close on the deal. And there's like, well, I didn't realize I was signing this. The attorney is just facilitating the deal in that example. The mortgage broker is just facilitating the deal just to get the deal done. They're not there to really protect them. So even that having a defensive minded attorney is not that common. So you definitely want to have a good attorney, good mortgage broker, good insurance broker.
Yeah, I asked that. Oh, go ahead, Reggie.
Oh, I was just going to say, in the best possible scenario, I mean, you know, you just got somebody who, well, yeah, I mean, basically what Roar said. I don't want to rehash it. You go ahead, Samir.
I asked that because me and Dylan hired a attorney because we wanted to structure the business entity in the best possible way, but after hiring the attorney, I realized, because I was mainly the one dealing with this, that I was doing most of the legwork on it, and the attorney was just kind of on the back end doing the paperwork. Once I had to come up with the idea, come up with the way I wanted to structure it. It wasn't really a guidance to it, you know. It was more like, what do you want me to do? I'll do it for you, and I'll do it in the best legal way. But it wasn't like hey, I've seen this as best practice, let's do it this way, you know. So
that's super common. Even in the CPA world, people, when I recommend my CPA, they're like, oh, he just wasn't proactive, didn't help me plan. I'm like, it's tough to find those proactive people. I know, like, if you go to Paul as a financial advisor, I'm sure Paul's going to be there, and he's going to, like, the financial advisors, they're there to be more proactive though. I mean, I'll let Paul chime in though. Like, when I engage with my financial advisor, like he is much more forward thinking. He's not really, he thinks about defensive mechanisms for sure from the financial standpoint. But that is one of the roles from a support role versus a CPA versus an attorney, mortgage broker, insurance broker. Those guys are very just like transactionally mindseted, and that's kind of their goal oftentimes. And so it's you really do need to kind of poke and prod. They may have the information in there, but you need to be asking the right questions in order to get that information out. I don't know, Paul, any other thoughts on that?
No, you know, and I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, I called 4 different attorneys. I called 4 different CPAs, and I asked them, I was like, hey, you know, I had some questions in regard. I kind of wrote like 10 questions down. And I was like, hey, have you heard anything about these Delaware accounts? You know, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And depending on their responses, you know, I made notes, and I'm like, this guy didn't know what he's talking about. He didn't have any idea. Well, I'm not sure. And I was like, okay, scratch that person off that list. And then I kind of went down the same line, right? What do you think about this? Have you heard anything about that? No, but I know. So like the guy that did my LLC, I asked him, because he's an attorney. I said, do you know about this? He's like, man, I'm gonna be honest with you. I can set up your LLC. This is the fee. He goes, this attorney's gonna know more about real estate, and this one's going to know more about the taxes. And he's like, schedule a call with them, tell them I sent you over there. And I was like, okay, hey, so-and-so sent me. And I did that. And I think after like 8 appointments, and each one of them was only like a 15-minute, 20-minute call. And they talked to me for free. And then I started putting, okay, this one's going to be the CPA for this one's going to be the attorney for that. And it's kind of like what Matt was saying, you know, for me, as a financial advisor, I'm proactively asking questions. Okay, what is your plan for this? How much money do you have in reserves? Yeah, you know, you want to start up a brokerage account, but how much are your expenses on a monthly basis? How much is your interest on your credit card? How much is this? And I always tell people, pay this credit card debt off because of the high rate. And then what are your savings for the next 6 months to 12 months? Anything outside of that, then let's go ahead and start. So that's that, you know, if the person that you're supposed to be your specialist isn't being proactive, I would try to find another one.
It's great.
Yeah. Matthew, Spot, you asked, and Matt or Roar, you may be able to answer this because you were talking about GL policies. He asked if we have business insurance as well as umbrellas.
So yeah, from the personal perspective, I do have an umbrella policy. And again, that's just one more layer that makes me sleep well at night. I got a $2 million coverage, and I think and 2 million isn't that much in today's lawsuits, guys. That gets burned up pretty quickly. That I think I pay $700 a year for a personal umbrella, something like that, for 2 million. Umbrella policies are not that expensive. Reggie, he's the one who's recently engaged in more business insurance, and that's what he was talking about earlier. Reggie, if you want to shed any light, I know you recently were getting quotes for some business insurance.
Yeah, so we're getting a basic GL policy, a little bit of E&O, and I think we did include the cyber insurance since we do anticipate on storing some of that sensitive information. But I mean, we're getting quotes back that are $3,000 and $4,000 a year for, say, $2 million worth of coverage. So, you know, I mean, it's not bad at all.
That's a little bit more than an umbrella, right? So in the business side, like you said, E&O, errors and omissions. So if we were to make a mistake in writing, like, we want to be protected for our potential mistakes out there. The errors and omissions is definitely something you want to be covered on. From a sponsor side of the house or GP side of the house, it's very easy to make a quick mistake and you wire 50 grand to the wrong account. All of a sudden that money's gone, right? So try to get yourself protected from the E&O side of the house as well as the cyber piece, because cyber is going to continue to be more and more of a factor, as you know, ChatGPT teaches everyone how to hack into whatever they want to hack into.
That's a good day if you wake up and someone accidentally wired you 50 grand.
I was talking to an associate today, and he was talking about, he goes, it took exactly like a month and a half. He goes, client sent me the wire instructions to send to this account in Canada. He goes, they were off by 1 digit. He goes, $3 million went out to the wrong account. He goes, it took so much time and effort for the client to try to get those monies back, because I processed what he typed in, and that money was gone.
Yeah.
It was crazy. I was like, $3 million. Next time you type in that account number, let me give you my account number. You're gonna send it.
And that wasn't even wire fraud, right? I mean, luckily that was you guys were able to get the money back. Wire fraud is the thing, right? I mean, one of my mentors in the real estate space happened to his grandma. She was in New York City. Someone called her and said, "Grandma, I need help." They had some old like a list of phone numbers for people who are above a certain age. So they say, "Grandma, I need help. I'm in jail. Like, I need you to wire me $25,000 now, or else, you know." And she goes, "Matt, is this Matt?" And she's like, "Yeah, this is Matt." And so right away, like, she believed, and then she ended up wiring $25,000 to this random person. And afterwards, she eventually called him. My grandma did the same thing. Literally a couple weeks ago, she was on the phone with these people, thinking they were gonna she was gonna lose all of her Social Security. So she went to Target and was literally buying $5,000 worth of Target gift cards she was about to send. And my sister-in-law was with her the whole time saying, "This is a scam. This is a scam." She's like, "No, they're going to take my money." Like, she was actively being told it wasn't the case. It took the Target manager to come down and tell her to not buy the gift cards. Like, that's literally how far it went. So it's wire fraud's a thing. People are out there scamming people left and right. So just be careful.
Josh, didn't you have that issue with an IRA one time where you wired to the wrong account and then you had to fix it? I remember you saying something like that on a podcast once.
Did I wire? I don't remember specifically wiring to the wrong account, but I
We
did
wired
have
to the
some.
personal account, not the IRA, was the fact.
Oh yeah, we did wire it to a personal account, but that was easy because it was still their account. They just had to wire it back, and we wired it somewhere else. But I have had fraud before. I have been scammed before. I lost about $10,000. First ever real estate investment we did back when we had the fourplex. It was when everyone always told you private lenders are like the best way to go. And I didn't know anything about anything, just getting started in the space. I'm like, all right, private lenders, they're the way to go. Hard money's terrible. Let's figure out this whole private money thing. And so we needed some extra money. Anyway, everything was falling apart as far as the fourplex goes. So I just go to this website that's got like these private lenders, and I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, lender's a lender, right? They're usually on a website. They usually have all their information, pretty public about it. And I don't exactly remember how it went, but I found some guy. We ended up messaging back and forth. And I thought it was kind of scammy initially, but he told me that he needed like, it was small amounts of money too, which is why I was okay doing it. He's like, yeah, it's, $350. You just wire it to this account, and we'll run your credit check. This will be like the process, application fee. And then once we finish this, then we'll get you squared away. And of course, the loan I needed was only 10 grand. So 350 didn't seem too ridiculous. So I was like, sure, here's $350. And then a week goes by, he finishes the process application, text messages me back. He never actually answered any of my calls, which should have been a giant red flag, but whatever. Newbie Josh, right? So then he said he needed something else, which was like $700, and I just fell for it and was like, sure, let's do it. Then he came back. Final thing he said was something along the lines of like, hey, I'm going to need you to it was like a double closing. Like, I need you to wire all the money that you need a loan for. I'm like, what if I didn't have the money that I needed? This doesn't even make any sense. Like, I need you to wire the money, and then we'll have our loan officer do XYZ. They'll reverse it, wire it back to you. We just need to make sure we have the right account, something like that. I'm like, oh, okay, it seems kind of weird. Anyway, super gullible Josh. I fell for it, lost 10 grand. Never look back.
Oh, man.
Don't be a Josh.
Don't be a
You can learn a lot from a Josh. Awesome. What else you guys got? Any other questions?
I don't have any questions. If anything, I think you touched on it earlier. I don't know if you said you were going to probably do this next meeting or, but I'm interested in regards to those IRA wire transfers. Whenever like you're going to help fund, right? Like, oh, okay, yeah, I want to fund, put 50 grand into your deal. I'm going to do it from my IRA. I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah, well, the wire piece is easy because you can throw a remark into the IRAs, because then they'll know where the money's going. Typically, these IRA funds are one big account that all the money gets flown into, then they allocate it as needed. So with the wire, you have a remark you can throw in there. It's not a big deal. The downside of the wire is you get the wire fees on one end or the other. You got some, Josh?
No, Matt was just saying later.
Oh.
So I was saying
Okay.
later.
See, Matt, with an ACH is what we were doing. We would ACH the money in, and then the IRA would just randomly get, here's 100 grand, and they're like, where's this money go? And so we'd have to call and verify on that. And so with an ACH, you do need to call and say, hey, here's all the money. We just sent you 40 grand. This much goes to these people, allocated appropriately, and then we get it back in writing and confirming in that case.
For sure. No, I guess it was referring in regards to, but no, that's a good point. ACH is different from the wire transfer. I guess it was regarding like, if you guys have your mobile home thing, right? And I say, oh yeah, I want to transfer 50 grand from my IRA. I think I have to put it into a self-directed IRA and then do the wire transfer. Is that the process there?
Yeah, correct. And so you get it set up with, Advanta is who I have mine with, or if it's an IRA, I have my solo 401k is who I have my 401k through. And so just because I know those, I will typically recommend our clients use them. But we have some other ones that we've used. I know Reggie's clients, Reggie's investors have used some other ones as well. But it's just, simple to get it set up. It normally will take, about a week for setup, funding, and then transfer, sometimes 2 weeks. So we normally, if there is an IRA investor, let's say there's somebody who's, hey man, I got $500,000 in my IRA. I'm going to put aside $100,000 to invest in your deal. We will earmark that money, because normally we say first investors in you hold your place in line is based on your money in your paperwork. We'll give a little bit of leniency with the IRA people to say, hey man, I'm just getting my IRA set up. We'll hold their place in line for those guys.
Could we do one of the advanced classes at some point in the future, specifically over raising funds from people's retirement accounts?
Yeah. That's definitely what we do.
Let's do it. But it's 7:09 now, so kind of run out of time for today's call.